The silence at dinner was deafening. Amelia watched as David scrolled through his phone, his wedding ring glinting under the chandelier light they'd picked out together 5 years ago. She'd prepared his favorite meal, salmon with dill sauce, roasted potatoes, and fresh asparagus, but he barely noticed, mumbling thanks without looking up. The gentle clink of silverware against china plates punctuated the silence between them. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of their Victorian home. A home they'd renovated together with dreams of filling it with children and laughter. Now it felt like a museum of what they once were. When his phone buzzed, his eyes lit up in a way they hadn't for her in months. "Work," he muttered, excusing himself from the table with half his food untouched. Amelia nodded, her face betraying nothing as she took another sip of her wine. She could feel it, the absence of love louder than any argument they could have had. She watched him walk away, noticing how he clutched his phone like a lifeline to another world. The slight smile that crept across his face as he texted back wasn't meant for her. Amelia finished her meal alone, methodically cutting each piece of salmon into perfect squares. Inside, something fundamental shifted. The first thread of their marriage unraveled, and she felt it snap with the clarity of a bone breaking. But unlike a broken bone that causes immediate pain, this break was cold, calculating, and accompanied by an unexpected sense of calm. She didn't cry. Instead, she began to watch, to notice, to catalog. This wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of her awakening. The day Amelia turned 35 should have been special. She woke to an empty bed, the sheets on David's side already cold. No card on the nightstand, no text wishing her happy birthday, not even the hastily bought flowers from previous years. David had left early, another important business meeting for the tech startup she had helped him build from the ground up. Amelia dressed carefully for her executive position at the finance firm, the same firm that had initially provided the seed funding for David's company when no one else would take the risk. Her blazer was Burberry, her heels Louboutin, reminders of her own success that had often been overshadowed by his more visible achievements. At the office, her colleagues surprised her with champagne and cake. To our financial wizard, her boss toasted, recognizing the billion-dollar deals she'd structured over the past year. Her assistant handed her a small gift, earrings she had once mentioned liking months ago. Meanwhile, her husband of 5 years hadn't even remembered. At home that evening, David returned late, surprised when she quietly mentioned her birthday over the takeout he'd brought as an afterthought. "God, I'm so sorry, I've been swamped with the expansion," he said, looking genuinely flustered as he pulled out his phone to order something. "I'll make it up to you this weekend." She accepted his hasty kiss with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She remembered how he used to plan surprise parties weeks in advance, how he'd once taken her to Paris just because she mentioned wanting to see the Louvre. Now she was just another appointment he missed, another obligation neglected. Something inside her hardened, not with grief but with resolve. The first physical evidence of his betrayal arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Amelia hung David's suit jacket, the one he'd supposedly worn to a business dinner with potential investors, and caught a whiff of something floral, something sweet and distinctly feminine. Not perfume exactly, but scented lotion, something she'd never owned nor would choose to wear. Her scents were always subtle, woody or citrus. This was decidedly not hers. With a detached curiosity, she checked his pockets and found a receipt for cocktails at the Loft, a trendy bar across town. Nowhere near the restaurant where his investor dinner was supposed to take place. 2 old fashions and 1 cosmopolitan. David drank old fashions. Amelia drank wine. The discovery sat heavy in her stomach, not like a sudden blow but like the confirmation of a diagnosis long suspected. With methodical precision, she snapped a photo of the receipt with her phone, then placed it exactly where she found it, making sure the edges aligned perfectly with the pocket crease. She hung the jacket back up, adjusting it to the exact angle it had been before. The lie wasn't loud or dramatic. It was invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. But it was there. And Amelia, with the meticulous mind that had made her a financial powerhouse, started connecting dots most would miss. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the decreased intimacy, the occasional unexplained expenses on their credit card statements. Individual incidents easily explained away, but together forming a pattern that couldn't be ignored. She didn't confront him. Knowledge was power, and she was just beginning to gather hers. The first time Amelia saw the mistress was purely by chance, or perhaps it was fate's cruel kindness, offering irrefutable proof. Stopping for coffee at an artisanal cafe near David's office, supposedly to surprise him with his favorite Ethiopian blend, she spotted him through the window of an upscale restaurant across the street. He wasn't alone. The woman wore a fitted red dress that hugged curves Amelia had been too busy building their life to maintain. Her hair fell in perfect waves, obviously freshly styled, and her manicured hand rested casually on David's arm as she laughed at something he said. The intimacy was unmistakable. Amelia recognized that laugh, the kind that's meant to flatter, to seduce, to make a man feel like the most important person in the room. She knew because she'd once laughed that way with David in the beginning when everything felt possible and love seemed unbreakable. She stood frozen, coffee growing cold in her hand as she watched David lean in, his face animated in a way it hadn't been at home for months. He looked younger, revitalized in the presence of this woman who appeared to be in her late 20s. Nearly a decade younger than Amelia. The woman was beautiful, yes, but it was her confidence that struck Amelia most abrash, entitled arrogance that suggested she was used to taking what she wanted. And right now, she wanted Amelia's husband. Any other wife might have stormed in, created a scene, demanded answers. Amelia didn't. She simply paid for her coffee, left the shop, and walked calmly to her car. There, with the door closed and privacy assured, she took out her phone and snapped a picture of them through the restaurant window. Evidence. Not for confrontation, but for something else entirely. Something she wasn't yet ready to name. That evening, David came home later than usual, smelling of mint gum and expensive cologne applied too recently. Conference call ran long, he said, kissing her cheek with practiced casualness before heading to the shower. Amelia nodded, focusing on her book, a biography of Catherine de' Medici, a woman history remembered for her cunning. She listened to the shower running, the meticulous way he washed away the evidence of his day. When he emerged, hair still damp and dressed in the pajamas she'd bought him last Christmas, he announced he'd be traveling for business next weekend. New York client can't pass it up. The Series B funding depends on it. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his lies were landing, who thought himself clever in his deceptions. Amelia watched as he closed their bedroom door, his silhouette disappearing behind it. She remained in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across their wedding photo on the mantel. She sat in the darkness, the weight of knowledge heavy on her shoulders. But there were no tears, no desperate pleas, no melodramatic confrontation. In that moment, something crystallized within her, not rage, not even sorrow, but a clear, cold purpose. She thought about the business they'd built together, how her financial expertise and connections had provided the foundation upon which his success was built. How the prenuptial agreement, which he'd barely read in his eager rush to marry her, contained clauses he'd clearly forgotten. He thought he was leaving her behind, both emotionally and soon physically. But Amelia Campbell, who had graduated top of her class at Wharton and orchestrated billion-dollar mergers, was already 10 steps ahead. While David was supposedly in New York, Amelia spent the weekend conducting a thorough financial audit. As the household's unofficial accountant with a professional background in finance, she had every password, every account number, every financial document meticulously organized and accessible. What she found confirmed her suspicions but also revealed something more alarming: hotel charges at the Ritz downtown, not New York, dinner for two at restaurants that required reservations weeks in advance. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany for $3,820 that had never adorned her neck or wrists. Most concerning were the small but regular withdrawals from their joint accounts, adding up to nearly $50,000 over the past 6 months, money that had disappeared without explanation or apparent purpose. Transactions she hadn't approved, money flowing into a life she wasn't part of. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. Their joint business account showed unusual transfers to a holding company she didn't recognize, Clear Vista LLC, a company that took minutes of online research to connect to the woman in red. David was funding his mistress's fledgling interior design business with their joint capital. He thought she wasn't looking. He was wrong. Amelia didn't rage or panic. Instead, she meticulously documented everything, creating backups of statements and transfers, taking screenshots of account activities, printing hard copies of transaction records. Evidence mounting not for a divorce court, though that would come, but for something far more calculated. What David had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that Amelia had been the primary investor in his startup. Her name was on much more than just a marriage certificate. And now, as she compiled her financial dossier, a plan began forming, intricate, patient, and devastating in its simplicity. 3 days later, Amelia sat in the tasteful office of Patricia Winters, one of the city's most formidable divorce attorneys. The walls were adorned with abstract art worth more than most cars, and the view of the downtown skyline served as a reminder of the high-stakes world they operated in. Patricia's reputation was built on representing high-net-worth women with unfaithful husbands, not for dramatic courtroom theatrics, but for the bloodless financial settlements that left those husbands wondering what had happened. "You've been thorough," Patricia said, reviewing the documentation Amelia had organized in a leather portfolio. "Most clients come in with suspicions. You've come with evidence." Amelia didn't smile. "I need to understand something very specific," she said, her voice steady. "The business. I'm not just his wife. I'm an investor. What are my rights?" What followed was a 3-hour strategy session that revealed a truth David had conveniently forgotten when signing their prenuptial agreement and subsequent business contracts, thanks to her initial investment and the specific legal structure they'd established. Amelia actually owned 51% of Horizon Technologies. Majority shareholder. While David had been the face of the company, she had quietly maintained controlling interest as a silent partner. He never read the fine print, Patricia noted with professional admiration. Most don't. The lawyer recommended immediate legal action, but Amelia shook her head. "Not yet," she said, a plan crystallizing. "I never needed to raise my voice. The contract does that for me. But timing is everything." When she left Patricia's office, Amelia felt a strange sense of calm. Not victory, it was too soon for that, but certainty. The game had changed, and only she knew the new rules. Curiosity drove Amelia to the address she'd found on the incorporation documents for Clear Vista LLC. The mistress's apartment was in a trendy downtown loft conversion, industrial chic with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Expensive, but not outrageous. Amelia parked across the street, watching as a delivery man carried in a large package from a high-end furniture store. She didn't knock or make her presence known. This wasn't about confrontation. It was reconnaissance. Over the next hour, 2 more deliveries arrived, art in protective wrapping and what appeared to be designer lighting fixtures. Through the large windows, Amelia could see glimpses of the apartment's interior, sleek modern furniture, much of it appearing new. A $5,000 restoration hardware sofa she recognized from their recent catalog. A hand-knotted Persian rug worth at least as much. Artwork that wasn't mass-produced prints, but original pieces. The kind of items that required substantial capital that was flowing from the accounts she shared with David. As the sun began to set and lights came on in the apartment, Amelia caught sight of the woman herself moving about the space with the confident air of someone who believed she had secured her future. She was on the phone, laughing, gesturing with a glass of wine. Was she talking to David? Probably. Amelia took several discreet photos with her professional-grade camera, documenting the apartment, the deliveries, the expensive furnishings. No confrontation. Only intel gathering. As she drove home, Amelia reflected on what she'd seen. The mistress wasn't living like a casual fling. She was setting up a life funded by Amelia's money, built on Amelia's marriage. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated replacement. Over the next 2 weeks, Amelia moved with surgical precision. First came the financial separation. New accounts at different banks, accessible only to her. Transfer papers shifting her personal assets away from joint holdings. She began quietly moving funds from their shared accounts, nothing illegal, nothing that could be contested, simply protecting what was rightfully hers before the inevitable confrontation. She contracted with a forensic accountant to trace every dollar David had diverted to his Mistress and Clear Vista LLC. The sum was staggering, nearly $200,000 when all business investments were included. Next came the business preparations. As majority shareholder, she had rights she'd never exercised. With Patricia's guidance, she drafted resolutions giving herself explicit oversight of all company financial decisions above $10,000. Documents requiring board approval, a board she technically controlled, for any new business ventures or partnerships. Legal tripwires that would activate the moment David tried to make any significant move without her approval. She transferred key patents held jointly into the company proper, where her controlling interest would protect them. The most delicate task involved meeting quietly with the company's CFO, a woman who'd always respected Amelia's financial acumen. "I'm concerned about some irregularities," Amelia said, showing just enough of the documentation to establish legitimacy without revealing her full hand. The CFO's eyes widened. "I had no idea you were still this involved with operations." Amelia smiled thinly. "I've always been involved, just not visibly." By the end of the meeting, she had an ally who would alert her to any unusual financial movements. While he slept in another bed, she stripped his future bare. The pieces were in place. All that remained was the trigger. The afternoon David told Amelia he wanted a divorce was sunny, almost mockingly beautiful. She had known it was coming, the signs were all there. He'd been distant, spending more time away from home, taking mysterious phone calls in the garage. He sat her down in their living room, his expression a practiced mix of regret and resolution. "This isn't working," he began, using the passive voice as if their marriage had failed on its own, without his active betrayal. "We've grown apart. I think we both deserve a chance at happiness." Amelia listened, her face a mask of calm that unnerved him. He'd expected tears, recriminations, perhaps even begging. Instead, she sat perfectly still, watching him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. "I've been unhappy for a long time," he continued, gaining confidence in the face of her silence. "I think it's best if we make a clean break. I'll be fair about the assets." At this, the faintest smile touched Amelia's lips. "Fair," she repeated, the word hanging between them. Yes, I believe in fairness too. She didn't mention the other woman, didn't bring up the money he'd stolen, didn't reveal that she knew everything. Instead, she simply nodded. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. David looked relieved, almost grateful for her composure. As he left to pack a bag, claiming he'd stay at a hotel to give her space, Amelia remained seated. She didn't cry, not a single tear. When Patricia called later to ask how she was doing, Amelia's response was simple. I filed the preliminary paperwork. The trap is set. Now we wait. The lawyer asked if she was okay. She didn't cry. She smiled. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks after David moved in with his mistress, Vanessa. He arrived at Horizon Technologies headquarters to find 2 stern-faced auditors from the firm's outside accounting company setting up in the conference room. Routine compliance review, his assistant explained, though David couldn't recall authorizing it. By noon, the auditors requested access to specific financial records, particularly those related to a series of transfers to Clear Vista LLC. David felt the first stirrings of unease. By afternoon, the auditors had expanded their scope, requesting all records of personal expenses charged to the company over the past year. The CFO, normally a steady ally, seemed oddly formal in their interactions. Who authorized this audit? David finally demanded. The board, she replied simply, avoiding his gaze. What board? I am the board, he snapped, confusion mixing with anger. The CFO slid a document across the table, board resolutions dated nearly 5 years earlier, establishing a formal board structure with Amelia as chair, himself as CEO, and 2 silent members representing the initial investors. His signature was at the bottom, though he had no memory of its significance. As the day progressed, the audit expanded. Staff were interviewed. Servers were imaged. His executive assistant was questioned about his calendar, particularly the discrepancies between his claimed business trips and his actual whereabouts. When he called his personal attorney in a panic, the response was blunt. You never read the company bylaws, did you? Your wife controls the company. Always has. His empire didn't crumble in a dramatic explosion. It was methodically disassembled, 1 ledger entry at a time. Vanessa first noticed the change 3 days after the auditors arrived at Horizon. The credit card David had given her was declined at Nordstrom while buying a dress for an upcoming industry gala, a gala where she had planned to make her debut as David's partner, not his hidden affair. The saleswoman's sympathetic yet judging look as she tried another card, also declined, was just the beginning. That evening, David returned to her apartment agitated, distracted. Just some business issues, he assured her when she asked what was wrong. Nothing to worry about. But she did worry when the $10,000 transfer he'd promised for the final payment on her studio renovation didn't appear. When she gently reminded him, his response was uncharacteristically sharp. I can't right now, okay? There's a cash flow issue I'm sorting out. The pattern continued. The weekend trip to wine country canceled. The interior designer for her new office put on hold. The discussions about which neighborhood they should buy in suddenly postponed. The lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, the lifestyle he'd promised would only get more luxurious once he left his wife, began to constrict. It's temporary, David insisted, but his eyes held a panic that belied his assurances. Late at night, she found him poring over legal documents, making angry phone calls to attorneys who seemed to have no solutions. One night, after too many scotches, he lashed out when she asked about their future plans. Just give me some fucking space, he shouted, instantly regretting it but unable to take it back. As the weeks passed, his gentle attentiveness transformed into irritable distraction. The promised fresh start soured before it truly began. When the money stopped, so did the fantasy. Vanessa began to wonder if she had traded security for a mirage. 6 weeks after moving out, David decided it was time to sell the house. The modern 5-bedroom in the exclusive lakeside neighborhood had been his pride and joy, custom-built 3 years earlier with the profits from Horizon's first major success. He arranged for a real estate assessment without informing Amelia, assuming that forcing a sale would pressure her into finalizing their divorce settlement, a settlement that had stalled mysteriously, with her attorney postponing meetings and requesting endless financial declarations. The call from his real estate agent came on a Tuesday afternoon. "There's a problem with the listing," she explained awkwardly. "The property isn't in your name." David laughed, certain there was a misunderstanding. "Of course it is. I paid for it." But a quick title search revealed the uncomfortable truth. The house was solely in Amelia's name, a tax strategy his accountant had recommended years ago that he'd signed off on without reading the details. The garage and pool house renovations he'd commissioned, she'd have to approve them. The plan to use equity from the house to fund his next venture? Impossible without her signature. Even access to collect his remaining belongings required her permission. He thought he walked away, but he never had the keys. The revelation was more than financial, it was existential. The life he'd built, that he'd assumed control over, had never truly been his to command. As his attorney explained the situation, David felt the ground shifting beneath him. "We need to revisit our negotiation strategy," the lawyer advised grimly. "Mrs. Campbell's position is stronger than we initially assessed." David thought of Amelia, of her quiet competence he'd taken for granted, of the paperwork she'd always handled so he could focus on the big picture. He began to understand, too late, that she had seen a much bigger picture all along. The legal notice arrived via courier at both Horizon Technologies and Vanessa's apartment simultaneously, a coordinated strike leaving no room for warning or preparation. David was in a product development meeting when his assistant interrupted, white-faced, with the sealed envelope. Inside was a lawsuit naming both him and Vanessa as defendants. The charges were specific and devastating: misappropriation of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of assets. Attached were meticulously documented financial transfers, photos of items purchased with company funds now residing in Vanessa's apartment, and damning email exchanges between them discussing how to create consulting contracts to justify their use of company money. Most shocking was the plaintiff, not Amelia personally, but Horizon Technologies LLC, with Amelia Campbell listed as chairperson and controlling shareholder. The company he had built was suing him, along with his mistress. The legal action came with immediate consequences: a temporary freeze on all company accounts to which he had access, suspension of his authority to enter into contracts on the company's behalf, and a court date just 10 days away for a preliminary hearing. His corporate credit cards were canceled within the hour. His email access terminated by close of business. When he tried to enter the R&D lab, his favorite place in the company, his badge was declined. Most devastating of all, the board, which he now understood Amelia controlled, had voted to suspend him as CEO pending investigation. When his lawyer called after reviewing the documents, his assessment was blunt: this isn't just a divorce strategy. This is corporate warfare. And frankly, David, she has you outgunned. That evening, when he returned to Vanessa's apartment, he found her in tears. The courier had delivered her copy of the lawsuit directly to her design studio in front of clients and employees. Her fledgling business reputation was in tatters. "They're saying I'm a thief," she sobbed, "that I knowingly took stolen money." David had no comfort to offer. The careful facade they'd constructed was collapsing, exposing the ugly foundation beneath. Now they sat in silence, united not by love but by legal jeopardy. The story broke on a Thursday morning, not in some tabloid or gossip column, but in the prestigious Wall Street Journal. Horizon Technologies leadership in turmoil. CEO suspended amid fraud allegations. The article detailed the lawsuit, the financial improprieties, and the board's decision to appoint Amelia Campbell as interim CEO while the investigation proceeded. Her credentials were listed impressively: Wharton MBA, former senior investment strategist at Goldman Sachs, founding investor in Horizon. The photograph accompanying the article showed her looking composed and authoritative in a tailored suit, standing at Horizon headquarters with the executive team. David was mentioned as the public face of the company who had allegedly diverted company funds for personal use. By afternoon, the tech blogs had picked up the story, adding more salacious details about the affair and the money trail. Investors began calling, concerned about the company's stability. Two major clients put their contracts on hold pending resolution of the leadership crisis. The company's stock, which had been enjoying steady growth, dropped 15% in a single day. Amelia responded with a press release that was a masterclass in corporate communication, acknowledging the difficult situation, reassuring stakeholders of the company's fundamental soundness, and outlining her vision for Horizon's future. A future that notably did not include David. She gave one brief interview to CNBC, where she calmly explained that the company's patents and intellectual property remained secure, and that the financial irregularities had been isolated and addressed. She came across as competent, unflappable, and fully in command, everything investors wanted to see in a crisis. David, meanwhile, found himself unable to respond effectively. Each statement from his attorney was countered with documented evidence from Amelia's team. Each attempt to rally support from business associates was met with awkward silences or outright rejection. The power shift wasn't gradual, it was seismic. He built it, but she owned it. Vanessa left on a Sunday morning while David was out meeting desperately with potential investors who might help him launch a new venture. She didn't leave a note, just emptied her closet, took her personal items, and walked away from the apartment she could no longer afford now that David's financial support had evaporated. The lawsuit had named her personally, threatening everything she had built. Her design clients, mostly from the city's elite circles, quietly canceled contracts, unwilling to associate with the scandal. Her small staff resigned, one by one. The dream of Clear Vista LLC collapsed under the weight of legal fees and loss of reputation. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. The life she had imagined, successful designer, partner to a tech visionary, member of the city's social elite, dissolved like morning fog. She didn't tell David she was leaving. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tears or recriminations. Their relationship, built on the unstable foundation of deceit and stolen opportunities, couldn't withstand the harsh light of consequences. Where did she go? Back to her hometown across the country, to the modest life she had been so desperate to escape. She left behind the furniture David had bought her, the artwork, the expensive kitchen appliances, all now evidence in the ongoing lawsuit. She took only what she had brought into the relationship. David returned to find the apartment still filled with objects but emptied of presence. Her toothbrush gone from the bathroom, her perfume missing from the vanity, her side of the closet vacant except for empty hangers. No goodbye, no drama, just silence. When he called her cell repeatedly, he found it disconnected. Emails bounced back. She had digitally disappeared as thoroughly as she had physically vanished. She had come into his life like a storm, disrupting everything in her path. She left like a thief in the night, taking nothing, leaving even less. The auction was held on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the initial lawsuit. By then, the court had ruled decisively against David, finding him liable for over $3.2 million in misappropriated funds, legal fees, and punitive damages. With his assets frozen, his income from Horizon terminated, and no investors willing to back a man with his now toxic reputation, David had no choice but to liquidate everything he owned. The auction house was crowded not with his friends or business associates, who had long since distanced themselves from the scandal, but with bargain hunters and the morbidly curious, eager to pick through the remains of a once promising career. Item by item, his life was assigned monetary value and sold to the highest bidder. The vintage car collection he'd so proudly assembled, the rare whiskey collection worth tens of thousands, the custom golf clubs, the designer suits, the rare first edition books he'd collected to appear intellectual in business meetings but had never actually read. Even his wedding ring went on the block, a platinum band that sold for a fraction of its purchase price. Most painful were the items of genuine sentimental value: his grandfather's pocket watch, the first server that had hosted Horizon's original code, which he'd kept as a souvenir, photos and mementos from happier times, now viewed by strangers with detached curiosity. Amelia didn't attend the auction personally. Instead, she sent a representative not to bid but to ensure that all proceeds were properly documented for the ongoing settlement. From her office across town, where she now led Horizon Technologies with remarkable success, she received periodic updates. Not to gloat, just to confirm. The final tally was less than expected, nowhere near enough to satisfy the judgment against him. As the auctioneer's gavel fell for the final time, David understood a fundamental truth. He had sold memories to survive, and even that wasn't enough. The coffee shop was Amelia's choice, public, neutral, busy enough that any outburst would be embarrassing. David arrived first, almost unrecognizable from the confident CEO of a year earlier. His designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack basics. The arrogant posture now stooped with defeat. He had requested this meeting through her attorneys, nearly begging for the opportunity to speak with her directly. When she arrived, precisely on time as always, heads turned. Her recent profile in Forbes as the tech world's unexpected powerhouse had made her face recognizable. Success looked good on her, not with the flashy ostentation that David had always favored, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. She sat across from him, ordering a simple black coffee, watching as he struggled to meet her eyes. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice hoarse. "I know you didn't have to." What followed was what he clearly hoped would be a cathartic apology for the affair, for the financial improprieties, for taking her for granted, for failing to see her true value. "I lost sight of what mattered," he said, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I threw away the best thing in my life for nothing." Amelia listened without interruption, her face betraying no emotion. When he finished, the silence stretched between them. He seemed to be waiting for absolution, for some sign that his confession had earned him forgiveness. Finally, she spoke, her voice level and controlled. "I appreciate you sharing that, David, but I didn't come for an apology." She placed a sealed envelope on the table. "These are the final settlement terms. My lawyers advised against any reduction in the judgment, but I've decided to waive the interest payments. It was a small mercy, nothing more." He stared at the envelope, understanding finally that closure wasn't being offered. "What about us?" he asked quietly. Amelia stood, collecting her purse. "There is no us, David. There's you and there's me. And I'm doing quite well." As she walked away, David understood the final truth. Closure isn't owed, especially not to thieves. 1 year to the day after David moved out, Amelia stood at a podium in Horizon Technologies' expanded headquarters, addressing the assembled employees, investors, and press. The company had not merely survived the scandal, it had thrived under her leadership, with stock prices up 60% and 2 major new patents secured. The occasion was the announcement of the Horizon Foundation, a new nonprofit initiative that would use company resources to fund technology education for girls in underserved communities. Today marks not just a new venture, Amelia explained to the applauding crowd, but a new philosophy for this company. Success isn't measured just in profit margins or market share, but in the impact we have on future generations. The foundation would be funded with a significant portion of company profits that had expanded dramatically under her stewardship. Her leadership style had transformed the company culture from David's high-pressure, winner-take-all approach to one of collaborative innovation and sustainable growth. Engineers who had been considering leaving now spoke of Horizon as the best workplace environment of their careers. Later that evening, a small celebration was held for the executive team at an upscale restaurant, the same restaurant where she had first seen David with Vanessa. The symmetry wasn't lost on Amelia, though she mentioned it to no one. As champagne flowed and her team celebrated their collective success, she took a moment to step away and look out at the city lights. A text message from her sister lit up her phone, saw the announcement. "So proud of you. Not just for surviving, but for turning it into something meaningful." Amelia smiled, thinking of how far she had come. She hadn't merely rebuilt from the ashes of her marriage. She had redefined success entirely on her own terms, with her own vision. The company was now truly hers, not just legally but philosophically. And its future had never looked brighter. On a quiet evening 5 years after the divorce, Amelia sat at her dining table alone, enjoying a perfectly cooked meal prepared by her personal chef, a luxury she had decided was worth the expense given her demanding schedule. The house was different. She had sold the one she had shared with David and purchased a sleek modern home overlooking the bay, decorated to her tastes without compromise. Classical music played softly in the background, Chopin, not the indie rock David had always insisted on. The silence between musical phrases was no longer painful or empty. It was peaceful, chosen, hers. Her phone buzzed with a news alert, another profile of her success, this time highlighting Horizon's expansion into international markets under her leadership and the notable success of the foundation, which had now helped over 5,000 young women enter STEM fields. The article mentioned David only in passing, a footnote in the company's history rather than its defining figure. She had heard he'd finally found modest success with a small startup in another state, though nothing approaching his former glory. Vanessa had apparently married a local real estate agent in her hometown. They were footnotes now, not central characters in her story. As Amelia sipped her wine, an exceptional vintage she had selected herself, she reflected on the journey. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed her had instead revealed her true strength. The pain had been real but temporary. The growth had been transformational and lasting. There were men in her life now, interesting, accomplished men who respected her achievements and saw her as an equal, not an accessory. But she was in no rush to remarry. She had discovered something.